The metaverse is emerging as the next big technology platform and promises to be the next frontier for human experiences on the internet. Into the Metaverse covers companies, technologies, and trends that are bringing these promises to life. Join creator and host Jonathan Ross-Friedman, founder and CEO of Super Social, as he interviews the brilliant minds that are building, shaping, and investing in the Metaverse.
Welcome to Into the Metaverse. I'm Yon, and joining me today is Connie Kuang, who leads the Value Creation Task Force at the World Economic Forum's Metaverse and Generative AI initiative, of which I also have the honor to be a member of. Connie considers herself as a Metaverse explorer. She has a background in brand and partnerships management on the international arena, and I'm very excited to welcome her to the show today, all the way from Geneva, Switzerland. For a bit of background, the World Economic Forum recently released fascinating reports about the metaverse, specifically about its governance and social implication, among others. And so I'm thrilled to speak to two amazing guests, starting with Connie today, about this new frontier. So Connie, welcome to Into the Metaverse.
Thanks, Jan. Thanks for having me.
So jumping right into my favorite key question, which I like to ask all of our guests, and really it's part of me being fortunate enough to speak to many brilliant minds in putting together some form of a consensus around what it is the metaverse. Now, I think we're very far away from a consensus. There are all kinds of theories and different articulation of what the metaverse could be or should be. And what I love about this space at the moment, it's all pretty much up in the air, no pun intended. And so, but for you, Connie, for the work you're doing, for what you've seen and have heard so far, what is the metaverse for you?
Yeah, it's a great question for all of the reasons you noted. But, so I guess I should clarify, the initiative's official name is called Defining and Building the Metaverse. And the reason I emphasize that name is because it is such a nascent space. And the reason we brought this project to the fore was to address all of the different ideas that are out there and the differing taxonomy around the metaverse. But, broadly speaking, from the forum standpoint, we consider it as essentially just a handy way of referring to the next internet. So, the next internet being a convergence of VR, AR, AI, blockchain, potentially being on the cloud, potentially using quantum computers. It really is just about this more tech-enabled and sophisticated tech world that we're heading into. So I guess I have a bit of a catch-all answer. The metaverse is many things and anything at this stage. And really, it's just about that next 3D, 360, socially connected platform that we're entering.
And that's really interesting because one of the follow-up question I have, which you're kind of already tapped into, which is how does blockchain, generative AI, digital twin all fit into the definition of the metaverse? And one of the things that I've seen just really living in this category now for about 3 years, also being part of the initiative, which gave me so much more context from other people's perspective, is the notion that when we think about the metaverse, we really need to keep in mind, and I think that's part of what you're saying, which is there's all of these technologies that are converging at the same time. To distinct and say, oh, this is metaverse, that's generative AI, that's digital twin, that's blockchain, it's kind of missing the forest from the trees, right? And kind of missing the big picture. And I think what I like about this initiative that you guys are doing for the past over a year now is that it allows to take a step higher and really realize that all of those different components are really contributing to the wider evolution of what you've described as kind of the next internet. And so I'd like to double click on that and maybe take a step back first, which is being the lead of the value creation in the Metaverse initiative. First and foremost, can you explain what exactly value creation means in the context of the Metaverse?
Yeah, it's a great question. So value creation for us really encompasses looking both at the economic spheres and societal spheres of things. So making sure that value is brought across not just business opportunities and revenue and profitability, but we are actually looking holistically at all of our stakeholders and just how the next internet affects all aspects of our lives. So value creation is trying our best to mitigate some of the challenges that we might be inheriting from the existing internet, because, just because we talk about the next internet doesn't mean there's an official break and we get a blank slate. We are going to be bringing in certain behaviors and patterns, and technology as well, protocols from the current world into the next. And so, value creation is as much about understanding and mitigating those challenges, as much about understanding the new opportunities that are coming, and also just seeing what might evolve and exacerbate in the good things as well of what we're doing today.
In other words, really what you're describing is something which resonates a lot, I think, with me is, as we think about the next internet, it's not about a revolution. It's about an evolution. And I think what happened in my mind in between 2020 and 2022, there was sort of this counter reaction to the existing internet. And like, let's wipe it all clean. Let's start fresh. All the platform needs to be new. Everything needs to be Bitcoin or Ethereum or blockchain enabled. All these big companies, they're going to be destroyed and dismantled. And like just really deterministic approach about what the next internet looks like. And I like how you're describing it and the approach that you guys are taking, which is there's a lot of good things that have been done. We cannot look at the last 30 years of the internet and say it's terrible. No, there's been an incredible level of innovation. There is a lot of applications. We can have as much criticism as we want about applications like Facebook. Facebook pioneered a new way for people to interact, and also in a different angle, really popularized what the internet could be used for. And there are companies who have done it across multiple dimensions. The evolution, I think, is what's really interesting. And so double clicking on that for a sec, what do you think are some of the key challenges that are going to need to be addressed in bridging that chasm between the today internet and all of those things that we are really excited about, interoperable worlds, decentralized user-owned virtual spaces, a digital economy that is more equal, where everyone can have a prosperous possibilities. What are some of those hurdles that you think we're going to have to overcome?
Well, to go back to your overview of this, for sure, I think the beauty of what we're doing here at the forum is we're hoping to serve as a neutral platform for a lot of the different spheres of conversation and debate about the metaverse. And so for those that believe in, needing to upend the system very dramatically and proposing ideas that might come from a philosophy of decentralization, to those who might have more of one of understanding that there's a benefit and a value of the existing institutions, and we could call that the centralization kind of school of thought as well. We try to hold those space for those because certainly there's value in understanding, both sides and the suggestions that eventually might meet a little bit in the middle or be adopted in one way or another to kind of bring forth the next world. Quite frankly, the last wave of the internet was a very beautiful and organic growth. I think at the end of the day, there were always, nice intentions of the possibility of technology, and we get really excited about them. So I think bridging the gap between where we've come from and where we're going to is really around the approach and the mindset of now looking at things a little bit more holistically. I think perhaps in the past, there might have been a drive to get the adoption, full steam ahead. There might have been that for revenue reasons. It really was purely around clear use cases that consumers just got really excited about, and everyone just ran full steam ahead. And because it was a new world, there were a lot of unintended and unintentional consequences of that we're now learning about. And so the difference between, us entering the new world and where we've come from is having that hindsight and hopefully using that to have now a little bit of foresight into where we're going. And so in that capacity, that's where we're really trying to do the work around unpacking potential social impacts of the metaverse and doing the research up front, or at least, raising the questions around, hey, what happens if we spend a lot of time in different types of realities in the metaverse? What's that impact on us? If we don't have those studies now, perhaps we need to put some focus to that and bring all the players around the table in order to do it. So I think, bridging the gap is really about approach and really just thinking 360, I guess no pun intended, for like this world that we're going into.
I like it. I have like a provocative proposition. You may want to discard it completely. You may want to use it. It's kind of the difference between, it's almost like until today, what we had was an accidental internet, as great as it is and as challenging as it is. And now we have a chance of what is an intentional internet could look like.
Yeah, it's certainly a provocative question because you're trying to split it into a black and white equation, you know. I mean, accidental internet, I don't think is necessarily fair actually to some of the builders of the internet that we have now, you know. But I certainly...
What I mean by accidental internet, I mean, it's another word of saying, and I think what actually the way you described it is more compelling, which is it's been an organic internet. Everything happened very organically. There wasn't really a big brother or a guiding hand, right? The hidden voice of capitalism. Like, it was just very organic with all of the best intention. And I think that's part of what bothered me with the conversation over the last couple of years, where everything felt so militaristic reaction to like how the internet has evolved. Oh, you know, these vicious companies. Like, I don't think any internet giant woke up one morning and said, we want to dominate people. We want to succumb people to our desires and needs. I think organically Google became Google, and competition forces you to want to be the best. And Facebook became Facebook organically because they could, you know. So I think that's maybe the inflection point of moving from an organic internet to, and I think now the key question is, and I'm curious about your POV and kind of some of the work that you see already coming out of the input from amazing organizations that are involved in the initiative. What is that non-organic? How can we keep that organic evolution of the internet, but adding a bit more intentionality? And the World Economic Forum, I think overall as an organization, has played an instrumental role working with large organizations. My question is, how are we going to bring the voices of both large mega cap companies and emerging organizations, like Super Social and others who are part of the initiative, in really just solidifying what could a more intentional organic internet look like in its next iteration?
Yeah, I love these questions. You're opening up such big questions. Of course, these are the ones that we grapple with in our different modes of research, and we try to address them from our different themes. So, back to around kind of just, I think the internet as it evolved in the past was, it was such a new area. And I think the difference with where we are now in the world is understanding the profound impact that this technology has in all realms of our society. And so for an industry that hasn't been really used to regulation and hasn't needed that because it's always existed in this sphere of innovation and new opportunity, which we don't want to tamp out. I think we've always thought that was, the trade-off was to let things run and not kind of look at, the consequences and the impacts in other areas. And I think the reality is that technology is everywhere now, and we have to have a different approach. And so having international organizations such as ourselves at the forum, it's really about bringing the voices together and now seeing that it needs a multi-stakeholder approach to looking at it. And I think also you're saying, some of these notions of the, capitalistic structures that have evolved and kind of intersected with the rise of technology and dominance, I think our answer to that is really, again, that we need to think about all of our stakeholders. And it's not about your responsibility as a business is really just to one, entity or for one end goal. There really is, multi impacts or multi stakes. So how do we do this? We work with private sector, public sector, civil society, academia, and even within private sector, we're very conscious of bringing together the biggest companies in the world who might have profound impact, but equally so the innovators, such as, you mentioned your organization is involved, those that are really thinking differently and are able to be scrappy and move at a different pace to really challenge some of the existing ideas that we might have. And every individual and every organization is going to have to play its part in the future. So in our social impact paper, we're looking at many dimensions of this multi-stake issue. So the notion of access and adoption, entering our future metaverse, making sure that as much as we're giving access now to profound high-tech experiences, that's not in fact widening the digital divide in our world, because you need now different types of devices or levels of connectivity and literacy for that. We're also taking a look at psychological and physical health, the notion of DE&I. There's kind of 5 main chapters in there. Of course, I don't want to go through them all here. You'll have a chance to look at those in the paper. But in all of those dimensions, actually, there's different things that civil society and academia or the public sector might play versus the individual citizen or the private sector. So let me try to make this a little bit more concrete. So when we think about access and adoption, there's many factors that lead to that. One is around just the connectivity to internet. The other is around access to hardware and devices. But in fact, a third area that actually plays sometimes a bigger role than others is literacy and comfort and knowledge of the technology to even use it and take the opportunity in front of you in the first place. And when you think about that, there is the onus on the individual citizen to educate themselves and be aware and look, for that content. But that's also the role of the public sector to be able to bring that education to the fore and for academia to be providing the research and the content for it. And so there's an element around funding there that needs to go into some of the literacy aspects or also just making the hardware accessible to different, regions or different accessibility modes or different types of, people around the world. And then, but that also doesn't preclude the private sector. The private sector can play a really great role in education for their employees, for business to businesses in general. And there's also, the investment of the private sector in, acquiring some of these tools. Think about the adoption of just the PC. A lot of people actually got exposure to that through using them at work. And it was through seeing the use cases and how effective and great it was at work that people went home and thought, maybe I should get a computer at home. And then really that, created that loop of consumer adoption with also the business adoption. So I think hopefully that's an example that shows you just how this really takes all people looking at it and bringing their different perspectives and having a healthy level of debate around this issue. And that's really, I think, because again, of, how much technology just permeates all aspects of our lives now.
And I think on access, and I know it's only one of the 5 dimensions you're kind of writing about in the report that is coming out, and I'm very excited for more people to see that. One of the things about access is also we live in a very privileged world where a lot of the use cases that we are experiencing and exploring in the next internet evolve around the worlds we live in. If it's Western civilization, essentially, Western developed economies, right? What's interesting is that in order for the majority of the world, what we think of as developing economy, but really it's majority of the world, in order for them to be part of this next internet, they need faster internet. They need for the most cutting edge devices to be able to run in their local communities. There's so much to do there on infrastructure, which is both public and private sector, but there's so much work to be done on access and making sure that there is a certain level of prosperity that this population can experience so they can also have iPhone 14 and not just iPhone 6, right? Just using as an example. And to give a data point that I don't know if how many people on our audience who are listening know, and just using that as an example, Roblox. 75% of the Roblox user base, Roblox has 66 million daily active users today. 75% comes from outside North America. And out of that 75%, many, many millions come from places like Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Brazil, Mexico, Russia. We're not even talking about Africa. There is India. There is majority of the world needs to be onboarded into this next internet. And I think this is why when we talk about access and adoption, it's not just how do we make sure that people around developing economies, and by the way, even in developing economies like the United States, there are millions of people in the United States that don't have a computer at home. There are people who don't have access to a fast internet still. So it's not just these majority world developing economies, it's also certain population inside the developed economies. So I just wanted to call that out. And I love kind of the, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's so important that as much as we take on different roles through the private or public sector in doing this, it's also important to look at the different layers of the issue. It's great that we mentioned the connectivity, the hardware, the literacy, there's also a role to play in terms of the technology design. So there are ways that we can provide on and off ramps to the metaverse that don't necessarily need to look like being in a VR or an AR headset. We address this in the paper, actually, that there's base elements of metaverse experience that are critical to get right. And this is for those most critical applications. So for the opportunities of the metaverse for getting you better access to healthcare services or financial services or education, there are some critical factors in there that you need to open up. So the metaverse needs to have some kind of 2D interface, have some kind of mobile, interaction point, things that can be the on-ramp or bridge the gap until there's more widespread adoption and access to, the heavier duty devices. But then there's, kind of variable parts of the experience. So, for gaming and entertainment, that would be great if you could be in a VR and an AR headset, but that's not as mission critical. And so I think it's important for technology designers, whether it's for application, for software, or the hardware itself, to think about these different factors. So you can see how this is such a complex topic because, there are roles to play at a very high level and then also in these, detailed executions of the work.
And I think that's a great segue to talking more broadly about all the 5 dimensions. And I know we're not going to spend time drilling into each of them, but just to kind of set the stage for the audience, really the 5 dimensions that are outlined in the report that is coming out are the first one we already talked about, which is access and adoption. Then we have psychological and physical health, diversity, equity and inclusion, sustainability, and economic impact and empowerment. I mean, each of these pillars, of course, they're also all interconnected, but each of these pillars is a whole world in and of itself. And also, they're not isolated from the work that corporations are doing. Each of them can be impacted by if you're building fundamental layer of technology to a consumer-facing application or human experience. And so how do you think that these big pillars, these 5 dimensions, what do you think is going to be the most effective way to drive the impact and the implication that we want? And what can we learn, and especially the World Economic Forum, from years of experience of collaborating with public and private sector? What are some of the success factors that you think will enable these pillars to come into fruition in the most effective way?
Education is key. And when we say education, we don't mean the traditional sense of, okay, our kids K-12 are learning about this. It's, education of the space and understanding of these topics is where our project drives from. So all decision makers who are looking at, making a metaverse application, being part of the metaverse, using it for their work, they need to be aware of these 5 dimensions. And, we're just really starting the conversation here. This conversation actually shouldn't be held only by us. It should be carried forward by all of the different partner organizations we work with that have worked on this paper, all those that might be reading, and then taking it forward in their own organizations and discussing and debating. For all of these dimensions, we're very early out, and we've brought together a lot of the leading voices in the research, but we've highlighted the fact that, in fact, a lot is missing, and we need to continue to do more. We need to invest in understanding these issues more. We need to continue the conversation. The metaverse, as you said, is just starting now, and it's going to continue further. So yeah, I continually go back to this piece around education and conversation around these and around all of them at once. They're interdependent. Not solving one means just, having the key open to others. They all kind of work together at the same time, which is why, we had the challenge of putting them all in this one paper. I have to admit the paper is rich, but it's really hard to simplify this down to one element and one thing.
What's the one thing that you are really excited that is coming out as an insight or a takeaway from the coming report on value creation?
Oh, you're asking me a challenging question. I did just say that they were all interdependent.
It doesn't have to be one pillar of a certain dimension.
Sure.
I'm just curious if there is, I always like to think about like what's the one thing that folks can take from a conversation. And so what's the one thing that you feel like after someone is reading the report, which as you said is very rich, what's the feeling you want people to take away from the report as a, not necessarily, okay, let me focus on environmental aspects of the metaverse. It's more like kind of an overarching theme or a feel. I think you talked about education a lot. Is that sort of the main thing of how important it is to really triple, double click and go deep on these fundamental pillars and understand how they are interconnected, how they each has their own journey that needs to be pursued?
Yeah, I think our greatest hope for any reader of the paper is that they leave with an appreciation for the fact that technology is a double-edged sword, and it takes a lot of collective conscientiousness and intentionality is needed around the broader social impacts. We are not afforded the luxury of just moving with things and seeing what happens anymore. We need to have an awareness of all of these dimensions up front. And I think often in the media landscape, we are hearing about a lot of fear and the potential negatives of things. And we have a hard time making sense of the good news stories and where it really fits in. And so my hope is actually that you read the paper and you leave seeing that really it is the opportunities and the challenges exist in all dimensions and all spheres, but we're empowered to think about the direction it goes in. And the empowerment comes from the knowledge and the education first. So, my hope is that people leave and want to look for more of the data, or they want to generate more of the data and have informed decision making rather than, feeling like, the wheels are turning off the bus and all we can do is just react and go forward. That's really not where we are. We have the chance right now. Actually, we have this window of opportunity, in fact, in the moving from the current internet into the next, to really actually look at these issues. I'm proud of the fact that we have this multi-stakeholder group that can do that and stop people for a little bit to dialogue and create this paper. But again, we're hoping that this is the springboard to a lot more to come.
100%. It does feel like an ongoing conversation, and just being part of the initiative over the past year, I have seen how topics became more clear, more detailed. There is a deeper understanding. And I think most importantly, there is a desire to truly understand how we can really build a better, more inclusive, more prosperous, more equal internet. I don't think it's going to be a democratic internet. I don't think that's necessarily realistic. I think it's more about how do we build, at the minimum, environments that provide an equal opportunity for success and for fulfillment. I think economic success is one thing. One of the pillars that I'm really curious about and going to spend time thinking more of in the next couple of years is the psychological and physical health element. I think the world is transforming so rapidly. We now have, for the first time, a generation of young people below age 18 that essentially grew up on these social platforms, social immersive platforms. We see them on Roblox, we see them on Minecraft. And I think there's real implication that people who grew up before that, even with the internet, that we really need to rethink what does it mean for identity? What does it mean for human interaction? We live in a world that, we are now recording this on a podcast platform, and, we're a virtual interaction. What does a world look like, and how do we not lose sight of the importance of being around together physically? I don't think the most sophisticated VR headset will never replace a feel of a human touch. However, what does the extension of the human experience looks like because of these technologies? It's not a replacement. And this is my deterministic POV about technology, is always how is it serving as an extension of the human experience and human endeavor, and not to replace what we've done before. And I choose to be optimistic. I know there's a lot of fear around the world, especially now with AI, and AI is going to ruin the world, and 50% chance that AI will... I I'm sure that there was every single generation, there was something that happened and everyone thought this is the end of the world, right? All the way to 10,000 years ago. Not to say that there weren't casualties, both in life and in work and in living. Definitely there have been casualties from generation to generation, and there will likely be casualties, hopefully not in life, in this transformation. But ultimately, I believe deeply that what's coming next has to be better than what was before, but it's going to be different. And I think that change is what many people struggle with.
We have to acknowledge that there is a change and that it is different than what we know today. And we have to acknowledge that there is an inherent fear and, transition pains that will come from it. But one of my favorite stories I like to say, in this vein is, when books were invented, let's say, or when books came out as more of a medium or a mass medium, there was a lot of debate and fear about losing our oral history and losing, stories that get passed down through the generations, through theater, through dance and whatnot. Those things haven't gone away, but they've certainly evolved. But books have also then, gave us this opportunity to disseminate knowledge at a mass level that was incredible as well. And so, with every new medium, there is a worry that, has come from previous generations. We've gotten used to it now, so it seems a bit ridiculous to us to think about this story. But it is a helpful analogy that I also lean on when I think about, our next media platforms, and could not agree more that ideally it's complementing and it's evolving our natural human behaviors, rather than taking us in a very, scary and, fearful direction.
And on this wonderful positive note, we're going to wrap up the conversation. Connie, thank you so much for joining me today. And I'm really excited for the listeners to also read the report that we will add as a link in the publication of the next episode. And thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. That sounds great.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Into the Metaverse. We hope you learned a lot and explored new aspects of the metaverse.